So, um, I am relatively new to the cohort. My name is Samyukta Ranganathan, and I've only done a couple of assignments right now, the formative and module one. So I'm going to talk about my research area where I think it's going, which is basically bridging the gap between an ancient oral tradition that I'm very well versed in, which is Indian classical music or ICM, and the voice science that can help make that tradition a little more robust. So I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an overview, first an introduction myself, and then an overview of ICM very quickly, and then talk you through both my assignments that I've done so far and how that's kind of helped me see where I want to go with my research. So I am a voice teacher specifically for ICM singers who struggle with technique. And I see a lot of it in my own age group, which is kind of what led me to this program. I'm also a performer, teacher, and composer of both North and South Indian styles. More on that in just a second. And I learned the typical way you would learn in India, which is you learn from a guru when you're 8. You go to their house, you sit in their house, you learn from them, and you do this with the same guru your whole life if you're lucky, or their whole life rather, because they tend to be older than you. But parallelly, I did complete a couple of degrees in a more scientific field, and I dabbled in management consulting for 5 years before deciding that music is where I wanted to be and teaching is what I wanted to do with my life. However, while I had somehow lucked into good technique, my peers and my students who were struggling with technique even at a younger age, I couldn't quite help them because I didn't have the vocabulary for it. So I started to hunt around and I found New York vocal coaching, which is what I am right now, where I got my first voice teacher training certification. And Debbie will always tell you once you start down this path, it kind of gets very addictive. So the next thing I knew is I found the voice workshop, which was extremely flexible. It helped me keep my job, which was important to me. And the pathway was very suited for me because it was a very individualized, specific outcome that I was looking for. And despite my lack of Western pedagogical knowledge, which was a problem in the US, I couldn't get into a university here because I didn't know an area. I was able to, and even was encouraged to apply and be in this program, which was extremely, extremely helpful for me. So quick overview, very quick. I can talk about ICM for days, but very quickly. There are two major styles, North Indian music, South Indian music. I train in both, which is a little unusual, but predominantly it is South Indian. North Indian music is thought to have been influenced by Middle East music, so it kind of develops that way. From there, I'm going to talk about the similarities. They are similar because they did come from the same place. They both are taught through the oral tradition of the Guru Shishya Parampara, or the teacher-student tradition, so you learn from the same teacher your whole life. It is melodic as opposed to harmonic, so there are no voice parts, which is very important for me. Um, they both do prioritize a speech quality or bold sound. How they produce it may be a little bit different. I don't know yet. That's part of what I want to do. Vocal agility gestures are extremely prevalent in both styles. So the voice is required to be extremely agile throughout the range, and we employ about a 2-octave range. And improvisation is a huge part of what we present on stage. A little bit different in both styles, but improvisation does take center stage in a concert. There are differences, and the differences are minor, but major enough to cause problems if you just want to switch over from one style to another. You can't quite do that. The range that you employ is different. So Hindustani singers tend to sing a little bit higher. The language is different. You get more of the Urdu and Hindi in the north, and you get Tamil, Sanskrit, and Telugu in the south. Which could also probably affect why the ranges are different. I don't know. It's again a theory that I might look at later on in life. There's so much I want to look at. The vocal embellishments themselves are different, so you can't quite translate one into the other. You have to kind of hear it and make adjustments. And then the lyrical content in South India tends to be devotional and spiritual, and the songs tend to be almost as important as the improvisation, versus North India. The improvisation takes hold of your concert because the North Indian lyrics are a little bit more colloquial, and much smaller in size. So my focus is South Indian music because that's where my training has been for the majority of my life, and most of my practice is for South Indian musicians. So it seemed to be a good link with theory and practice there. So the formative assignment, the first assignment, apart from getting the cobwebs out of my writing skills from my master's degree 16 years ago, it also helped kind of identify for me what that gap was that I was looking for. How was I supposed to bridge this traditional teaching method that I have seen and learned from with an overarching pedagogy right now that doesn't exist? So I started by collecting the limited studies done in ICM, and they tended to be quite clinical and very specific to certain things, which didn't quite translate well into a pedagogy or a teaching methodology. But it did really reveal a few really interesting things that then kind of shaped what I want to do next. One of them was that hyperfunction, strain, and range reduction seemed to be the predominant complaint in singers, and that was also reflected on the ground in my own practice. Furthermore, I think stemming from the fact that it is an oral tradition, there is a hesitance to seek professional vocal help when dealing with voice change and voice issues, which then the more you delay, the more problematic it gets, and therefore affected people's longevity in their careers. I also interestingly found that there was an idea or a preconceived notion that you either came with a voice when you were 8 years old or you didn't. So teachers tended to cherry pick their students a little bit. Oh my God, your daughter has great pitching. I will definitely teach her. Oh, you don't have great pitching. Why doesn't she take up an instrument? I think that may be better. So either you came with a natural voice or you didn't, which I find problematic because I actually love teaching singers who think they can't sing. And all this comes from, I think, a lack of how in ICM teaching methodology. There is a way one should sound that is often communicated in our classes, but how to get to that sound isn't quite communicated. So a student often fends for themselves, or they get frustrated with their teachers and try to, or give up or quit or find somebody else. Some of that how is registration confusion. So how do you navigate registration shifts from that bold speech voice to a voice that actually wants to transition to the next register? If you want to navigate that, how do you do it? Doesn't exist. There's an inability to teach pitching, like I had mentioned. And there is a lack of efficiency, I feel, in teaching agility gestures. It's all kind of put down to hours of practice. The more you practice, the faster you will get, which again, I feel like there should be a more efficient way of teaching it, and I think there will be. So overall, I feel there needs to be a better integration of vocal technique into repertoire teaching, which is predominantly what we teach during our lessons, is songs, improvisation, items, that kind of thing. So from there, in module 1, I decided to actually hone in on and focus in on registers in and of itself. Given that Indian classical music doesn't really have register definitions, they use these words real and false to describe how the voice should sound. So real being your bold speech quality voice, and false has a negative connotation to it, where it's breathier, lighter, M2 head voice region. So without the knowledge of how to navigate it, this could possibly be one of the causes that leads to strain in the upper ranges. So the first thing I did was actually try to go in and define and map the range and the registration we actually use. So I kind of cross-referenced with all the studies that had already been done in several genres. And so I mapped out men and women's workable range, if you will, for Indian classical music. And then comparing it with certain studies already done, I think the studies are listed on my references slide, I came to the conclusion that chest voice / chest mix and a speech quality dominance was being employed in these ranges. And because we like a neutral laryngeal position, because we do prioritize lyrics over everything else because it is devotional. A neutral laryngeal position seemed to be the best position for Indian classical music, and that's what we tend to use. So I felt that I could draw strategies from CCM technique to see if any of those could be applicable to Indian classical music to help navigate those register changes. One of them was belt twang and the pharyngeal voice, totally fascinated by the subject. And I feel like some of these acoustic elements of pharyngeal voice and belting and twanging can help that strain in crossing over to the next register without just pushing your breath up and without knowing how to navigate it. So I am starting to try this in my own studio actually, and for a couple of students it is working. And SOVTE exercises, they've been known and well studied to manage strain and lighten the load of Indian classical singers up in the higher octaves. And especially for those who already come with an over-compressed, over-compensated voice, SOVTs tends to be super helpful for them to be able to find a lighter register up there and then slowly add the strength back in once the voice knows how to lighten itself as it goes up into the higher registers. So I found these two in particular to be particularly helpful for Indian classical singers. And from there, I actually caught onto two very interesting topics that I want to kind of research further as I go through this program. One is acoustic registration, and which is never discussed in Indian music. I don't think we even know what it is. Even though I think as I was reading, I realized we do have one big acoustic shift when we sing in our style, and also because we use so much agility in the way we sing, how do we manage the register transitions at those speeds effectively without straining the voice as well? So that kind of put this image in my head. It's kind of vague, so all I could do for you is this odd image right here. Is this kind of visual of how I see I can affect change in Indian classical music, and that is if I can find an efficient way for acoustic registers, laryngeal mechanisms, and agility gestures to function together. They all, in my mind, I think their interaction would be extremely revelatory for Indian classical music to find out how they interact and how we can use that understanding of interaction to create a methodology that would be suitable for Indian classical music. And if that can affect hyperfunction and strain in a positive way, I think that would be extremely useful for my teaching practice. And the other relationship as well is what I'm really interested to see is if you have someone with hyperfunction, how does it dampen these other three mechanisms here that you see on the left side of the screen? And how do they interplay? And if I know that, I think I'll be able to help my students and maybe even create awareness, which is important for me to develop a pedagogical method for Indian classical musicians that has practitioner buy-in, because right now I'm still battling that resistance that tends to be prevalent in our style. So I need to have ICM practitioner buy-in to actually implement this pedagogy. And I wanted to be able to address the main complaints that I see over and over again: high range, strain, loss of voice, and the longevity of career. And if in this whole thing I can help teachers teach those who aren't considered naturals, I think that'll be a huge barometer for success for myself. Here are the big references. And thank you. That's it. That's my presentation. And thank you for listening. And thank you, Voice Workshop, for encouraging me all this way. I can't wait to finish and see where this takes me.